What's up everyone, it's Kelly, and today I've got a compilation of gradient nail art tutorials for you. But we're going to be doing it a little bit different today because I'm actually going to be focusing on specialty finish polishes. So one thing about gradients is you can really use any color you want or any finish you want, but I feel like a lot of times we tend to lean towards doing gradients with cream nail polishes. And what I wanted to do today was really highlight the different kinds of finishes that you can use for gradients and how they differ a little bit from doing your average everyday cream gradient. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Some of them use a little cosmetic sponge, some of them don't require one. And by the way, if you are a beginner and you're not familiar with how to do gradient nail art in general, I do have a couple of videos. One is basically everything that you need to know about gradients and how to do them and all of the supplies you could possibly need. And I also have a video showing 6 different types of gradients you can do. I will link those in the cards if you want to check them out first, but today we're going to be focusing on these specialty types of finishes, so let's just dive in. So I'm actually going to start off with a funky kind of gradient. This is a hollow jelly gradient, and I've done hollow gradients and I've done jelly gradients, but when you're doing a hollow jelly, it's a little bit different. Just to give you a little quick example of what not to do, here's what it would look like if you did try to sponge on a hollow jelly gradient. It basically pulls all of the jelly color out and it just leaves the hollow. So of course we don't want that. We do want to get all of that beautiful jelly color. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually using 3 different colors that I think work really nicely together, and that is purple, red, and orange. So I started off with an orange base just because I feel like that's kind of the lightest color out of the bunch, and I think it won't affect the colors over it as much as if I did orange over purple, for example. So what I'm doing is I'm going to start with the darkest color on the top, and I'm basically just kind of patting that on my nail over the orange until I start to get a little bit of that purple color. And right now there's a pretty strong line where the purple ends and the orange begins. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to soften that up by using the red jelly, and I'm going to be doing the same technique. I'm basically just kind of dabbing it on. And the cool thing about a jelly finish is since it's a little bit more sheer, it's a lot more forgiving when it comes to blending colors together. So you're going to notice that the color starts to blend without you actually having to mix the colors together. So you can start to see it happen. It's a little bit of a slow process, but as you work on it a little bit more and keep on tapping, you're going to notice that it becomes more blended. And then once I do that, I'm going to go in with the top and bottom colors again, just to make them a little bit stronger. So on the bottom half, I am doing a little bit more orange just to get that color a little bit deeper and richer. And then I'm doing the same on the top because I want it to look more purple. And that is literally all you need to do. I'm just finishing off with top coat and you have a nice smoothly blended gradient without having to use a sponge. In fact, I don't recommend using a sponge when it comes to jellies because, as you saw, it's not going to work. So this is a really easy way to do a gradient if you're not in the mood to break out the sponge and have a lot of cleanup after. So now let's dive into a more traditional type of gradient, and I'm actually starting off with a blue base, but I'm going to be sponging pink and purple over it. Now, if I was doing this with cream finishes, I would want to start with a white base, but since we are working with shimmers, I don't really need to worry about the colors muddling together because they are opaque enough and they have enough shimmer to kind of hold their own. So I'm just taking a cheap cosmetic sponge, and you don't need to find any specific brand. I just buy the cheapest ones that they sell at the store, and I'm going to be applying my colors, and I'm doing it diagonally because I want to have a diagonal gradient. It's super easy to do and it really just requires applying it on the sponge a little bit differently. I'm also going to be using these little barriers on my skin just so that cleanup is a little bit more minimal. I just buy those in bulk again on Amazon, so I'll link those down in the description, but I'm just going to start sponging on. And even though the colors are going to show up over the blue, I do need to do a couple of layers just to make sure that that color is fully opaque over that blue color. But once I'm done, I'm just going to peel off that little barrier on my skin. There's still a little bit of cleanup that I need to do, so I'm just taking acetone and a little Q-tip, or you can use a little cleanup brush, which I do like to do in the areas around my cuticles. And then that's that. Super easy to do, and it actually blended really nicely together, and all of the colors showed up really beautifully, even though I didn't have to do it over a white base. Now, just for fun, I decided to add Kelly's Constellation over these because the 3 colors that I used are my collaboration shades with Orly, and I just think they work really well with this topper. So just threw that on for fun, but of course that is an optional step as well. But yeah, it's super easy. And when it comes to diagonal manicures, you'll notice I like to apply the colors on my sponge diagonally. You can still apply them normally, just straight across, and then hold the sponge diagonally. But personally, I prefer to do it this way just because I don't have to worry about the angle matching on each nail because it's already built into the sponge for me. Now let's move on to another classic type of gradient, but this time we are doing it with a linear hollow finish. So I'm going to be using a few different shades from England, and these are going to be a little bit different from your usual linear hollow because this type of hollow formula is a bit different. They almost give a little bit of a scattered effect, so I think that's really interesting, but I did want to use these because they're pretty different from hollow jellies. For this type of finish, that's a full coverage finish, you can actually use a sponge and sponge that onto your nail, and it will impart the color of the polish on there. The only time you don't want to use a sponge is if you're working with jellies, but yeah, I just ended up using the beigey pink color that I used as my base plus 2 pinks just to kind of give a seamless blend into that darker pink, and that's not always necessary, but when possible, I do like to have a kind of middle color in between to help blend the 2 colors that I want to be the top and bottom of my manicure. But yeah, it's super simple. I feel like this almost turned into a scattered hollow kind of manicure, but when it comes to England, the hollow is pretty subtle, so it's hard to see in the gradient, but in the sunlight, it looks really beautiful. And either way, it just looks like a beautiful, shimmery gradient manicure. Now, so far I have been showing you the manicures using the same finish for all of the polishes in my gradient. Now I'm going to show you how you can do it with a couple of slightly different finishes. So this first example, I'm using a sort of flaky shimmer from Mooncat, and then I'm using a foil shimmer from Holo Taco, and I'm just applying those onto the sponge as I normally would, and I'm just going to start sponging them onto my nail, again using the lighter color as my base, especially because the 2 colors are very similar. You don't have to go too crazy with finding a base coat that works, but this ended up blending really nicely, especially with that Holo Taco shimmer. I feel like that color of the shimmer really came through and blended very nicely in with that lighter Mooncat color. So I didn't even need a middle color to work these 2 out, and I just had to apply my top coat, and I had the perfect siren mermaid kind of gradient. And here's another example using 2 different finishes, but they are very similar. They're both what I would call hollow jellies from Orly, but this first one is a very sheer light pink that is really packed in with hollow glitters. And then I also have a slightly deeper pink that has a teeny tiny little hollow micro shimmer, and it just has a little bit different of a finish, so it's not as packed in there. It's not as loud of a shimmer, but it is a brighter and deeper color. And since this is a jelly, again, I don't want to use a cosmetic sponge because I'm going to lose all of that beautiful color. So I'm just going to use the bottle brush, and I'm slowly building that color up on the free edge of my nail. So it kind of looks like the color is getting a little bit deeper and darker as I apply it. And then once I'm satisfied with how that deeper color looks, I am applying that first pink color over my whole nail because I want to make it seem like the whole nail has the same finish. So I want all of that beautiful hollow sparkle to come down onto that darker pink as well. And it's super seamless. I feel like on camera you can kind of see a little bit of the line, but in person it's a lot smoother, and it really does create a seamless gradient of jellies. And last but not least, we have possibly the easiest of the gradients, and that is the glitter gradient. So I'm just applying a tiny bit of this hollow glitter from Starly onto a sponge, and I'm just sponging that onto the free edge of my nail. And when you use a glitter like this and a sponge, it does start to give you full coverage. So you could apply this across your whole nail if you wanted a full coverage glitter, but if you want a gradient, you want to apply those really dense parts of the glitter just to the edge of your nail. And then once you're happy with that, you you can actually go in with the bottle brush and start to create a little bit more of a transition into a slightly more sparse area. And I do think that this type of gradient works particularly well over black because it kind of just looks like the black color is kind of eating into the glitter, and the glitter is just kind of like bleeding into that darkness. So I always think that looks really beautiful, but when you're applying it on the bottle brush, it does look a little bit more sparse. So as you go up the nail, you want to use that bottle brush, and it just creates this perfect glitter gradient that's really, really thick at the bottom, and it just gets more sparse as you go up the nail. And that is it for my little gradient compilation of tutorials using non-cream finishes. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these manicures is your favorite? What kind of finish would you like to see me do a gradient of? Leave it all in the comments. We can chat about it. Shout out to my supporters on Patreon, my Royal Astronomer Amanda M, as well as my Cosmic Admirals Paola, Ken, Rosie, and Angel. I really appreciate your support, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!